So I got an email from Dario at G66, and he said there'd been a chap asking who's into Scott Henderson. How would you go about building a Scott Henderson rig? These videos are brought to you by G66 UK, and that's your place to get a VP4, FM3, FM9, or FX3 in the UK with no waitlist. So what I've done here is kind of look up around some forums and bits and pieces what it is that Scott uses, and then sort of tweaked from there. So I guess one of the more constant things is that he tends to use something with greenbacks in it. So in our Dynacab world, we've got a couple of places where you could go for a bit of this. So I'll just pull up channel B and show you one of the other options. So obviously, I guess, well, maybe it's not obvious, but 29 here, 4x12 1960, that's a Marshall cab with, but also Friedman. Friedman cab has both V30s and greenbacks in it, but we could use this one here. In terms of mic choice, Scott apparently seems to use an SM57 a fair amount, and position wise, I think he goes sort of like he says on the seam of the cap, and if he wants to get a bit more vintage tone out from there a bit more mids or whatever. And that I personally was using the high cut. To me, there's like bite to his tone, but not like fizz. So that's the Friedman cab. I ended up using this cab, but if you look at the position, I've gone a little bit further over to the so either of those might be fairly good options. So what's that, 4.8 centimeters away, position 6.1. But yeah, the high cut might be useful, taming some of that kind of fizzy element. So that's kind of the cab element, which I think is a little bit more straightforward than any other part. Just something with some greenbacks in it. I use the Dynamic Mic 2 here as well because it's a little bit smoother. But again, experiment with this stuff. I think that's an SM57 Dynamic 1 and SM7 Dynamic 2. Okay, we'll go back to Dynamic 2 just for that's what I dialed in. Then I did find that sometimes one of the things that he does is to add a little bit of this kind of frequency here if he's finding the sound a bit dark. So without this, it's not bad, and you might kind of prefer that, but so a boost at 3379 hertz, so 3.3 kilohertz, and that's kind of giving us, just like a little bit of a push in the presence department, which once I show you the amp settings, you might be surprised that might be needed. Amp choice wise, there's a couple of options again. So I think based on photographs, he plugs into the normal channel of a Plexi. I think the first channel, or 1, would be bright, and then 2 is normal, which is what I see him plugging into. Now, I think his is a 1971 Plexi. I'm not sure if that would be massively different here, so again, you're going to have to tweak based on things that you find. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of component drift and elements like that in amps like this as well. So the tone stack, I've ended up not really in the same places as him. Although Presence dimed, I've heard him say that essentially, like a Marshall amp, you have to get up to about 8 or 9 before it starts to sound right. So I've kind of, based on that, gone with that 8.37, bass at 0.96, mids at 1.67, treble at 6.7, Presence at 10. Now, again, options. This Plexi 100 normal. Now, one other thing that I noticed is that you've got this kind of like sagginess. Like the bass is a bit undefined. So what I found works quite well for this, if you go into the input EQ, just cleans that up, right? Hear the difference. So that works really nicely for that. I did that on both channels. So that's kind of amp-wise what I thought worked quite nicely. And it will also kind of clean up quite nicely, I've noticed. Down at about 7. Okay, and then delay-wise, he uses an SE70 for both delay and reverb. So the delay here that I've chosen, I'm not totally pleased with it, and maybe I'd rather use something that gets out of the way a little bit. Something like that, maybe. But 400 milliseconds is the key number there, really. That's the information I can find. That it's like that's his number. And then reverb wise, he said he uses like a 2-second hall reverb. So it's normally like wet and dry anyway. So maybe I'll turn this quality up. Just subtle-ish. Okay, and then there is quite a bit of information about drive pedals he uses. So the RC boost, so this is an exotic pedal. He's got his own signature now. Sorry, I've got a bit of noise because I've turned the gates off. Maybe I'll turn that back on because it just responds better with the gate off. The actual volume response and stuff. Right, so the RC boost, gain at 3.7, bass at 3.35, treble at 5. And he says, you know, he works with both of the drive pedals that he uses, the level at 10. So that's why that's like that. And then adjust the gain to taste. And then again, this is a kind of taste thing. And if he's on his bridge pickup, he dials back the tone. Down to like 5 or whatever. So that's something to bear in mind. If you're finding this a bit bright, to me it's a little bit bright, I think maybe. Again, you could use this PEQ here. Just dial that into your own taste. Okay, and then the second drive option is the SD9. Even more distortion, really. So he runs the tone back on it, and again level at 10, and sets distortion to tape. So that's kind of where I would start for this stuff. I wouldn't say I've got it perfect or anything. Then I've got to try stereo chorus here because I don't have the ARI on. I think Marco Fanton has done a video on creating that particular block if you want to check that out. So even if it doesn't get us exactly there, I think it gets us in a helpful-ish kind of ballpark, which could have some inspiring tones for you anyway. I think he's using some fairly spanky pickups there, Sir, right? But if you're finding there's no reason that you might not want to dial some of this gain back. And just to experiment with finding where the sweet spot is for you. But I think some really good stuff. Again, check out some of what Scott Henderson has said in interviews and videos. You'll find he's talked a lot about tone. He also uses a Sir Bella, which I think is a great amp. That's based on his Dumble modded Bandmaster. So there's other great tones, but I think Plexi is basically what he uses most of the time. And, well, a Sir version of his Plexi, which is essentially a clone, but with a master volume. Yeah, I'll drop this into the folder. I'm not a Scott Henderson expert. I just did some research on this. And you can do similar things yourself, I think, if you want to build tones around some of the people that you're interested in. The cab section is the hardest bit to emulate, really. And I think he's got IRs out there if you want to check those out. But yeah, that's where I got to. Thanks for stopping by. And did this get in the ballpark of Scott Henderson? Probably not as much as you'd like, but I gave it a good go. Cheers for stopping by. I can't play like Scott either. That's a big factor. Cheers.